Actually, just a breakdown of what we're going to be doing is I'm going to have these questions pulled up on my screen. I'm going to give you guys like a minute or two to solve them. So just make sure carefully read through the passages, and then pick whatever answer's best. And then I have the answer key, and we'll go over what's the correct answer and I guess why. So let's get started. First, we have this question. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Put your hand up or unmute. All right, so it seems like most people got this one right. The answer is B. That's because the last sentence in the passage um, says that the Linacut process supported her aim to unite Black women through her art, and sentence B says that it uses art to connect people, especially Black women. I noticed some people said A, and that's I can see why that would be right, but it only briefly describes the Linacut process, but doesn't actually discuss the availability of the materials used in the process. Does that kind of make sense? If there are any questions about that, let me know through chat and I'll answer. C, okay. So someone asked why C isn't right. So C is not right because the text says that the Linacut process enabled Catlett's work to reach a wide audience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the Linacuts made her commercially successful. So essentially, we don't know exactly like how much money she made off her Linacuts, like how much it actually benefited her, how much profit she made. We only know, I guess, the expanse of how her work reached other people. Does that kind of make sense? All right, perfect. Any other questions? Yes. So someone asked if it was asking for, I guess, overall how it affected her, then yeah, it would be C. But in this case, it's asking, I guess, what is the overall significance? I guess how it impacted other people rather than herself. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. All right, moving on to the next one. So this time I'm going to read it out. So in West Africa, jails have traditionally been keepers of information about family histories and records of important events. They have often served as teachers and advisors too. New technologies may have changed some aspects of the role today, but jails continue to be valued for knowing and protecting their people's stories. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? So we know that the passage is pretty much just telling you what the jails mean to their people. So read through the answer choices and then whichever one suits best. Okay. Again, most people are getting A, which is the correct answer. So I think the reason that A is the most correct answer of all of them is because it's the most general. So that's going to be A. B, although jails have many roles, many of them like teaching the best. Yes, that's true. The text does say that they have often served as teachers and advisors too. However, that's not the main purpose of the whole text in general, because it discusses how they're keepers of information about family histories and important events, which is associated with overall the preservation of the community's history. And I saw some people said C. Entertaining, I don't think that's exactly the right word in this case, just because while yes, the knowledge and I guess history that it preserves could potentially be entertaining, that's not exactly what the passage is trying to get across. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then D, technology can now do some of the things that jails used to be responsible for. If it were asking to extrapolate on this idea, potentially, but no, the text doesn't really talk about that much. While yes, It does say that new technologies may have changed some aspects of the role today. That's kind of that sentence there is kind of used as, I guess, more support as to why the jails are still so important to the community. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. All right. Are there any questions about that problem? Okay. The following text is adapted from Lewis Carroll's 1889 satirical novel Sylvie and Bruno. A crowd has gathered outside a room belonging to the warden, an official who reports to the Lord Chancellor. One man, who was more excited than the rest, flung his hat high into the air and shouted, as well as I could make out, "Who roar for the sub-warden?" Everybody roared, but whether it was for the sub-warden or not did not clearly appear. Some were shouting bread and some taxes, but no one seemed to know what it was they really wanted. All this I saw from the open window of the warden's breakfast saloon, looking across the shoulder of the Lord Chancellor. What can it all mean? He kept repeating to himself. I never heard such shouting before, and at this time of the morning, too, and with such unanimity. Unanimity, yeah. Based on the text, how does the Lord Chancellor respond to the crowd? So, using some of the evidence in the text, just, I guess, the Lord Chancellor's response to, I guess, the racket, answer this question, whichever answer best supports the evidence in the text. Okay, someone asked what unanimity means. That just kind of means everyone agrees or everyone's doing the same thing. So like if you have a unanimous vote on something, that means that everyone voted in the same way. And in this case, it's talking about the shouting, right? So it seems in this case it's the Lord is asking why are they shouting all the same thing at the same time? You know what I mean? Oh, I got a question that says on the PSAT, will there be a mini dictionary like the star? I'm from Michigan, so I don't know. But no, there's not a mini dictionary. I'm not really sure what the star exam looks like. Sorry. Okay. So it seems like most people have submitted their answer. The correct answer is D, but we'll go one at a time and kind of explain the rationale as to why the others are incorrect. So I think a lot of people get tripped up on the ones that actually have like a passage from fiction, because the other questions, a lot of them are just kind of here's some information, do with that what you will. But in this case, it's actually a passage from a novel, and you kind of have to interpret what the characters are doing and how their interactions affects like the tone of the text. So choice A is incorrect because it isn't supported by the text. It does say the passage does say that the Lord Chancellor asks about the meaning of the crowd's shouting, but it does not suggest at all that he knows what the crowd wants. The Lord does not say that at all. In fact, he is inquiring about what it could mean. So that's not going to be A. B is not correct because again the text doesn't suggest that the Lord wants to speak to the crowd. There's just not really any evidence that supports that, and almost always in these PSAT reading questions you're gonna have like exactly like an exact place where you can draw the connection. So that's not going to be B because we don't have a place in the text where we can kind of point an arrow to exactly where it supports that. Does that make sense? And then C, he expresses sympathy for the crowd's demands. Again, there's there's not really any indication that he has sympathy. If it were if the word were like confusion or concern, then maybe that would be true. But sympathy, you kind of have to realize like the definition of what sympathy is. Like, is he feeling bad, I guess? But no, he doesn't know what they're shouting about, right? So there's not really any way that he could feel sympathetic. And then also, I should point out that it says that the crowd shouting annoys him. Again, in this part where the Lord Chancellor is responding, to the shouting. He doesn't really say that it's annoying at all. So again, since there's no way to point out exactly where the text supports it, then that's not going to be right. Now D, you can kind of pinpoint a location for the supporting evidence. So he describes the crowd as being united. That's kind of what I said when I was defining unanimity. And I saw a lot of people in the chat change their response to D after I explained what unanimity means. So I think if you're studying extra for the PSAT, I'd recommend going over a list of like SAT words. That can be helpful. Because again, you're not going to have a dictionary. You're not going to be able to look up what the words mean. And unanimity, you can kind of see the prefix un. It's kind of just another way to say unity or like united in such a way that it all sounds kind of the same. Like their requests seem the same. So that's going to be D, because he describes them as unanimous, which is another word for saying united, even though the crowd clearly appears otherwise. And we can circle that right here, where some of them are shouting bread, some taxes. So even though it seemed to the Lord Chancellor that they were all united, they actually weren't. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, someone asked if we have a list of words to study. I can make one, but also if you look up just SAT study words, there's plenty of resources for that. Are there any other questions? All right, perfect. Seems like we get that one. Let's move on to the next. Okay. Arthur Conan Doyle's stories about Detective Sherlock Holmes were published between 1887 and 1927. They've inspired countless successful adaptations, including comic strips, movies, and a television series, Sherlock Hound, directed by Hayao Miyazaki, who is celebrated for his animated movies. Until 2014, these stories were copyrighted. The right to adapt was only available to those who could afford the copyright fee and gain approval from the strict copyright holders of Doyle's estate. Some journalists predict that the number of Sherlock Holmes adaptations is likely to increase since the end of copyright means that blank. Which choice most logically completes the text? Okay, a couple people asked me what adaptation means. So essentially, if you have like a novel or any, I guess, art form, an adaptation is when you take that concept and you put it into another art form or another form of media. So if you have a book and you make a movie adaptation of it, that would be like how the Harry Potter books came first and then they made movies of it. That's the movie adaptation. Does that make sense to you guys? And someone asked if there's a mathematics unit in this PSAT exam. This is just the reading section. Tomorrow there's a math section. Okay. I'm getting a lot of C's. That's the correct answer. But I'm also getting some A's and B's. So I guess let's go over why those are not correct. I guess first I should say that we're back to, I guess they're giving you information and you have to take that information and find exact evidence that supports the answer to the question. Choice A is incorrect because this is an assumption and there's really nothing in the text that suggests that this is true. So it says Doyle's original stories will become hard to find. If you can't look at the text and find an exact place where, or an exact, I guess, evidence as to why this is true, then that's going to be a no. Choice B is not correct because, again, it's not supported by the text. The passage never discusses people's interest in detective stories, so there's not really any basis for this assumption to be made. And then choice D is not correct because again, it's not supported, and the passage doesn't really say anything about like the copyright process, I guess. It only really mentions the strict copyright holders of the estate, not really about the novel or about like what happens when, I guess, when the return fees are collected or anything like that. That's just not really the main point of what the passage is, I guess. Um, we're talking about in the passage what will happen in the future. And it only briefly mentions the copyright holders and doesn't really say how that's going to affect the future of like of like the Sherlock Holmes franchise, I guess. And then C is right because it's it's very general. A lot of times the answer to these questions are going to be pretty general. Just kind of going to be saying like, how is this going to affect the whole topic, you know? In this case, we're talking about the Sherlock Holmes adaptations. And it's talking about how until 2014 they were copyrighted. That changed, made it easier and less expensive. So it made it available to those who could afford and gain approval. And then some journalists predict that the number of Sherlock Holmes adaptations is likely to increase because, and C is the answer that fits that most correctly. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about this problem?
Um, so since the end of copyright, so technically, if you're saying that if it's copyrighted and then it's gonna technically get extinct, stories can get extinct or something.
Kind of. Okay. I see where you're going with that, but again, that's not really, I guess, the purpose of the passage. It doesn't say anything, or oops, it doesn't say anything about the process of the copyright and how people are, I guess, waiving the fee and gaining the approval. So even though it's briefly mentioned, it's not a main point of the text. It's kind of used as a support to answer C. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question? Okay. So someone asked if we'll post this reading PDF so that you can keep working it if we don't finish it in today's session. Yes. Yeah. The PDF of this and also the PDF of the answer document, we'll post that. We'll send that out so that you can keep working, check your answers. Are there any other questions? Oh, okay. So how long do you suggest we spend on one question? So definitely not this long. Because in this case I'm going through and I'm explaining why each answer is wrong, but when you're actually taking the test, I think you have about, I mean, on these I'd spend probably a minute. So read the text, underline whatever seems important to you. Honestly, my strategy has always been read the question first and then like this part of the question, not necessarily the answer choices, and then go back, read the text, underline the portions that stand out, and then go read the answers, and whatever the text is, I guess, most generally supports, that's going to be your answer. And that should take about a minute. All right, another question is this the same level of difficulty as we're doing, or is the PSAT harder? So there's actually different levels of difficulty, and the answer key that I'm kind of reading off of right now indicates the difficulty level of each question. So there's difficulty level 1, 2, and 3. This question was a level 1. The one we did before was a level 2. We haven't really gotten to any level 3s yet, I don't think. Oh yes, we did actually. Yeah, the last one was a level 3. It seems like a lot of the level 3 ones are the ones that are passages taken straight out of like a book. On the test, will there be a passage that is for multiple questions instead of just one? No. At least not on mine. There wasn't. And I don't think there can be. Uh that's more of like an AP test or like ACT type thing. The PSAT and SAT don't really do that. So it'll just be one question per passage because they're not long passages. They're just these little paragraphs, you know. If there was more, there might be, but since they're so short, there's not really much you can ask about them. Oh, someone asked what's the ACT? That's just another standardized test you can take instead. That's the one I prefer. Obviously, the PSAT isn't really optional, so you kind of have to. But you kind of get to pick between the SAT and the ACT, and that's just up to you, up to preference, I guess. Look into the different sections and I guess structure of the ACT versus SAT and choose whichever one suits you best, I guess, suits your skill set. Will there be FRQ and essays? No, not in the reading section. There's some free response on the math section where you just have to like type in your answer, but not on the reading. It's just multiple choice. Yeah. From now on, I'll tell you what the level of the question is before reading them. On the actual PSAT, you won't be told that, but if that helps in this case, I'll do that. And then someone asked what's the difference between SAT and ACT. Essentially the ACT has four sections, and that's English, reading, math, and science. Whereas the SAT doesn't have science, it just has like English slash reading one, English slash reading two, math one, and math two. So you kind of get like another chance by having the science section. Does that kind of make sense? And then the reading on the SAT is going to be a mixture of like grammatical stuff versus like this kind of stuff where we have a passage and we have to deduce the answer. And on the ACT, you have one section that's just grammar, and then the next section is just reading passages. How many times do I suggest that you take the SAT as a junior senior? I only took it once in my junior year. I haven't taken it since. It really depends on what score you get and what schools you're trying to get into. Yeah. So I'm gonna just move right on to the next question. At the end, if we have time, I'll go over any more questions about like the actual PSAT because I think most of you are juniors, right? Juniors or sophomores maybe, since you're taking the PSAT. I'll go over that at the end. So, if you want to just, you can keep sending the questions, and then, oh, there's some that are actually a lot younger, so never mind. But if you keep sending me the questions, I'll answer them at the end once we finish going through the questions. So let's move on to the next actual reading question. Okay. And you asked for the level of the question. This is a level 2. So 2 out of 3. Oh, hi. Level 2. Dutch painters in the 16th and 17th century often showed tables filled with large wheels of cheese or carved shards of butter. Some art historians, noting that dairy products were a major component of the Dutch diet, interpret these depictions as a reflection of everyday Dutch eating habits. However, a group of researchers recently reviewed hundreds of food-related paintings and found that lemons, which could only be required in the Netherlands at a great cost, since they had to be imported from warmer climates, featured in Dutch paintings of the period more than 3 times as frequently as dairy products do, thereby casting doubt on the idea that blank. And using, I guess, context clues in the text, what choice most logically completes it? All right. Send in your answers when you're ready. So I'm getting a lot of mixed answers here, mostly A and D, but also some C's and B's mixed in there. So let's go over. So the correct answer is C. Wait. Yeah, sorry, C. So A is not correct because the text suggests the opposite. It says that dairy products were a major component of the Dutch diet, while lemons were an expensive import item. So we can infer that lemons were eaten much more rarely than dairy products. So remember, this is kind of one of those questions that are like trying to trick you because it's asking what's not true. Because it's asking what is it's casting doubt on what. So what the evidence in the text kind of tells you that which statement is not might not be true. Does that make sense? So A says that dairy products were a more significant component of the Dutch diet of the period than lemons were. Well, yes, at the beginning it says that that might be true. That they ate a lot of dairy essentially. The later evidence where it says however, and then you have this whole thing about how they found lemons a ton in the Dutch paintings. This should not indicate that the dairy products were a more significant component of the Dutch diet. That it should, I guess, reflect doubt on that. It should question that dairy products were more important because lemons were seen more. Does that make sense? Let me read that question. Oh, okay. So good question. So someone asked, I guess I'll just read the question. It says to complete the text, so wouldn't you be casting doubt on the idea that they eat more dairy, therefore saying that lemons were more popular? Yes. Yeah. Okay. I see your point. It's also really specific though. Most logically completing the text. I'd say that this is pretty tricky. I don't it's rough. A and C seem like very viable options, but I mean comparing it to C, depictions of food in Dutch paintings of the period should be taken as realistic representation of Dutch eating habits. You kind of have to differentiate between the two because A is super specific, and yeah, you could take it to be true, but also it only pertains to like the dairy and the lemons. Okay, someone asked if thereby casting doubt, is that a common way of saying not, or are there other ways they'll ask for it? No, no, it's not that common. They're trying to confuse you. That's kind of what the PSAT and SAT like to do. They want to like twist your brain in knots, like make you figure out what they're asking. You just have to translate it into human, I guess. Figure out, are they asking for like what is true or what is not true? What does the text suggest is could not be true? In this case it's no. A lot of times though they will literally say which of the following is not true. We might get to some of those in the PDF of these questions, but there's just going to be a ton of ways that they're going to ask that. So make sure you read the question really carefully, instead of skipping through and picking which most logically completes the text. Because if you don't read this last part, you're going to think that it's asking what is true, what would be a good way to wrap up this text. You have to see that thereby casting doubt part, and you have to realize that it's asking for what is not true. And anyway, I guess back to the answers. A, it's true. However, it's a little bit too specific and doesn't really present a good way to wrap it up because it's just talking about the cheese and the lemons, whereas the text is talking about the paintings. Oops, the paintings and their eating habits. Does that make sense? So B just kind of generally doesn't really make sense. It doesn't reflect the point of the passage, you know. They're not really talking about like comparing to other, I guess, painters of the time. And then D, again, this could be true, but we don't know because the text doesn't say anything about it. We have no idea. We have no idea what the symbolism could be. It never does it suggest that there's symbolism. Even though that answer sounds pretty and it looks nice, it looks like it would make sense to be on the PSAT. you have to be really careful with exactly what it's asking. Okay, does that check out? Okay, and then C is correct because this kind of it loops back to the beginning when we're talking about the Dutch diet and the painters. It's just generally a good way to wrap up the text, and it says that we would be casting doubt on the idea that the depictions of food in the paintings, again bringing it back to the paintings, should be taken as realistic. So we're saying that it should not be taken as a realistic depiction of Dutch eating habits. Does that? Oh, and someone asked what casting thereby casting doubt means. That just means like it makes you question the how true a statement is. Oh, before we do this one, someone actually a couple people chatted me and asked for me to not read the passage out loud. So just put like yes in the chat if you want me to read them out loud and no if you don't. Okay, I'm getting a lot more yeses than no. So if you don't want to hear me read it, you can I guess turn down the volume and read it on your own, but for the people that do want me to, I'll keep doing that. And yeah, you won't get that on the real test, but since we're just practicing right now, that's fine. Okay, herbivorous sauropod dinosaurs could grow more than 100 feet long and weigh up to 80 tons, and some researchers have attributed the evolution of sauropods to such massive sizes to increase plant production, resulting from high levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide during the Mesozoic era. However, there is no evidence of significant spikes in carbon dioxide levels coinciding with relevant periods in sauropod evolution, such as when the first large sauropods appeared, when several sauropod lineages underwent further evolution toward gigantism, or when sauropods reached their maximum known sizes, suggesting that blank. All right. Once you finish reading through the answer choices to finish the text, just yep. I'll tell you. For those of you that are asking what level it is, I'll tell you after because it was pointed out that if I say the level now, that might I guess shake your confidence about it, and I don't really want that to happen because on the test you're not going to be told what the level is, and don't want that to mess with your answers. Okay. Um, I'm getting a lot of B, and I'm also obviously getting some other ones, but I guess the prevailing answer seems to be B, and that's correct. So before I go on to explaining why why the other answers aren't right, I just want to say that a lot of people get really tripped up on these types of questions just because there's so many big words, and that makes sense. Like reading this, you could hear that I was stuttering over like every other word just because we don't say words like sauropod or like atmospheric carbon dioxide, but don't let that phase you, because this is just it's telling you about science stuff, and then you just have to find the main idea. You don't have to know what these words mean. um okay, so the correct answer is B. A is not correct because the text does not describe any fluctuations in atmospheric carbon dioxide. So there's no evidence to support the conclusion that such fluctuations had different effects on different sauropod lineages. So that sounds really convoluted, but all it's saying is that nowhere in the text does it suggest that it affected different lineages. The only time that the text even brings up different lineages is gotta find it. Oh, right here. When it says that they underwent further evolution toward gigantism. I don't even know what gigantism means, but it doesn't say anything about how the carbon dioxide affects the different lineages. Does that make sense? So again, like in all the other questions, there's nowhere that you can take this answer and draw a line to where it says that. There's not really any actual physical evidence that can show that that's true. Okay. Choice C, that's not correct because the text indicates that there weren't significant increases in the atmospheric carbon dioxide. So it says that the answer C says that the carbon dioxide was higher when the largest known sauropods lived. However, it literally says in the passage that this is not true. There is no evidence of significant spikes in carbon dioxide. So we know that that's not true. Then choice D, that's incorrect because the text says that atmospheric carbon dioxide levels didn't increase at important periods in the sauropod evolution. So again, the text says, so these two answers are both wrong for the same reason. The text said that there's no evidence of significant spikes. So we're not really going to, there's no reason to assume that this did have an effect. However, B literally says what the text says. It says that the evolution of the sauropods, the evolution of the sauropods did not depend on increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. That's true because of this, because there's no evidence that there are significant spikes. Does that make sense? So just ignoring all the big words in this, it literally tells you the answer in the text. So when you're reading through the answers, go back and try to find exactly where the text says that. So are there any questions? Are there any questions about how I approached that? Hold on, I need to plug my computer in. Okay, there we go. Okay, not getting any questions. So this one was actually difficulty 3, and I know exactly why this was a difficulty 3. The actual question and answers are not really that complicated, but the words in it are. And a lot of people just get confused by the amount of words they don't know in a text, especially when it's about science. You don't have to be a genius to figure out the answers on these, I promise. Even though it seems convoluted, it's not. You don't have to know anything about sauropod evolution. You just have to take exactly where the text says the answer, and that's going to be what it is. All right, moving on. So this is another type, like a completely different type of question where, oh gosh. Okay, wait. How are we going to do this? So there's actually 2 pages of this. Can you guys read this, or is it too small? No? Okay. Okay, some people can read it, others can't. So I guess I'll give you a sec to read this, and then I'll move to the next. Where are the next? Okay, so the answers just aren't on there. So we'll skip this one. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay, digital paywalls restrict access to online content to those to those with a paid subscription. And in an investigation of the effect of paywalls on newspaper company revenues for print and digital subscriptions and advertising, Doug J. Chung and colleagues compared actual outcomes with a paywall to control estimates without a paywall. Make sure you remember that, what they're associating control and not control with. The researchers concluded that introducing a paywall is generally more beneficial for larger newspapers, which have high circulation and tend to offer a substantial amount of unique online content. Sorry, you can't read all of D. It says the Denver Post had only a negative 1% revenue change, which was the smallest percentage change of the selected companies. And someone asked, what is a paywall? I don't know. I have no idea. That's not really important to the question. Just pay attention to, I guess, just the changes, like the information in the table and how it relates to this little chunk of text right here. Paywall is a subscription fee. Okay, yeah. Okay, I guess just for context, everyone's telling me, well, I feel a little bit stupid, but everyone's telling me that paywall is just when you have to pay to access content. Okay. Seems like most people have sent in their answers, and yes, it's C. Most people are saying C, and that's correct. So, C is the best answer, just because it concludes that paywalls are more beneficial for larger newspapers. So, I guess what it's saying is that 20% revenue change for the New York Times. This is true. Yeah. And that's a positive percent change, right? So that means they made more revenue. And then the Denver Post, that's a smaller one, had a negative 1% revenue change. That means that they kind of went down. So it didn't really support them as much as it supported the larger newspaper. However, A doesn't support the conclusion. It does not include any small newspapers. So Chicago Tribune, that's large. And the LA Times, that's large. Same with choice B. LA Times, large. Chicago Tribune, also large. So it doesn't compare between the small and large. So it doesn't support that the paywalls are generally more beneficial for larger newspapers. Okay, and then D says that it compares the Denver Post, and it doesn't compare with any large ones. Right, so the Denver Post, that's a small one, only small. It doesn't include any large ones. Okay, so how does C actually support the conclusion? The conclusion that the researchers made was that introducing a pay, so the question's asking to compare how it affected smaller ones and how it affected larger ones, and you want to come to the conclusion that the larger ones are benefiting from the paywall, and that the smaller ones are not, and it's kind of causing a deficit for them, which is shown when we talk about this 20%, this positive 20% increase in revenue. So the New York Times benefited. They started doing better. They made more money. Denver Post, small one, and it had a negative increase. So that means their revenue went down. So someone said the question isn't asking to compare large and small newspapers, though, only if large newspapers had better revenue with paywalls. So actually, even though it doesn't seem like it's directly asking you to compare, it actually is, because it says more. And even in your question, you asked if they had better revenue with paywalls. Okay, better than what, though? So the only way to really prove that with the data that we're given is to compare it from a large to a small. Does that answer your question? Okay. Someone asked if B would be correct if you just saw the percentages because they match like C. Okay. I think I get what you're asking there. So if you weren't shown the newspaper size, then yeah, I mean, it would work. But in this case, we have to take into account whether the newspaper whether the company is large or small, because we want to show that it's true for the large companies. We don't really care that much about the small. We're kind of using the small as a comparison. Okay, are there any other questions? Accomplished printmaker and sculptor Elizabeth Catlett used her art to explore the Black experience in the United States. In a paper for an art history class, a student claims that Catlett had a particular talent for unifying various artistic traditions and styles in her work. So this question's asking a little bit different. Which quotation from a scholar describing Catlett's work would best support the student's claim? So now you have to, it's like you're kind of doing your own quote and choosing which one supports the best. So send in your answers when you're ready. Okay, for this one, there's kind of a wide variety of answers. So the correct answer is going to be A. But so this question was difficulty 3. So usually that means that there were a lot of answers that seemed like they could be right. So it's hard to exactly pinpoint which one is correct or like most correct. That's something that kind of trips a lot of people up because there are some answers that could both be right. Yeah, and then you don't know exactly which one is most right. So you have to kind of make an educated guess about which one is most supported by the passage. Someone's raising their hand.
So we haven't seen her artwork yet.
No, we haven't. So it does explain though that so yeah, even though it doesn't actually give you an example of her artwork, it explains what she used it for. So to explore the Black experience in the United States, and then so and then it explains kind of what the actual like the logistics of how the artwork looked and what it I guess what it meant. So it also says for unifying various artistic traditions and styles. That's also going to be important. So A, someone said, is it A because it describes the unity between mother and child? Okay, I can see how that would be true, but I think that the title of the works in these don't really matter that much, except yeah, not really. The actual title of the work doesn't necessarily depict what the actual piece is going to be about, right? Like you never know. But in A, it does say a sculpture of 2 Black figures. Okay, there. That supports this. Black experience, 2 Black figures. Catlett used an ancient indigenous sculpting technique, combined the visual aesthetic of modern Mexican muralists with that of German artist Kathakovitz. Kathakovitz, yeah. So this kind of supports unifying various artistic traditions and styles in her work. So we can, I guess, draw a line from using the ancient indigenous sculpting techniques and the visual aesthetic of modern Mexican muralists and German artists. That's unifying various artistic traditions, right? Yeah, someone asked if that's why it's A. Yes. Yeah, okay. And then B, Catlett overlaid fabric onto a canvas to represent the clothing of a father and his toddler, positioned to evoke classic images of a mother and child. Okay, so that kind of just explains what the point of that particular artwork is. It doesn't really have anything to do with exploring the Black experience, and it also doesn't describe her unifying various artistic traditions. It only describes one, which is the overlaid fabric. That's only one artistic tradition, so it doesn't show that she's unifying various. And then it also doesn't say anything about exploring the Black experience in the United States. So again, you can't draw a direct line from that answer to a place in the text. And then C. Okay, so we do see that Black unity, that's in the title. Yeah, sure. Exploring the Black experience, right? And then it says that it is sculpted from mahogany, which is one artistic style, I guess. but it doesn't compare anymore. It doesn't compare to any other artistic tradition. So it doesn't support the second part of the student's claim. While it does support the exploring the Black experience because it's about, Black unity in America. However, it doesn't support the other part, which if we didn't have A as an answer, maybe C would be right, but we do have A, and A supports both parts of the statement. So you do have to be careful with that. And then D, again, we talk about African American women, so it does support the Black experience part, but again, we only talk about the linoleum cuts. Does that make sense? So we're only supporting the first part and not the second part. Whereas in A, we're supporting the first part and the second part. Are there any questions about that? Oh, someone's raising their hand. Go ahead.
But aren't they similar?
Aren't what similar?
The answer and the D.
Yeah. Yes. So A, C, and D are all pretty similar. But it asks which one would best support the student's claim. Thankfully they put A first, because I feel like if they didn't put A first, someone would just pick C or pick D, because they do, yes, yeah, they do support the first part of the claim, but they don't support both parts. So A just makes a better answer.
Oh, that makes sense.
Okay, perfect. Are there any others, or should we move on? Oh, and that was a difficulty 3, which makes sense because A, C, and D were both were all three so similar. You just had to pick which one is the best. Okay, moving on. Okay, now we're on to the grammar ones. These should take pretty, I guess they should be pretty quick. Right, because it's just you're finding what word fits the best. So I don't know how to say that. Cucurbits, a group of plants that include squash and melons, relied on mastodons to spread their seeds in the Ice Age. When these animals died out, cucurbits faced extinction in turn, having lost their means of seed dispersal. Around this time, however, the ancestors of indigenous peoples in North America began raising cucurbits as crops, thus blank the plant's survival. Okay, so it seems like most people got D, and that's correct. So someone pointed out, and this is definitely a tip that I do want. Oh, first someone's raising their hand. What's up?
I just got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, do we get any practice questions like this to do as a homework?
I'll send the PDF out, or we'll send the PDF out. So if we don't finish all the questions on this, which it doesn't seem like we will, because we're only a third of the way through, then yes, you'll get these and an answer key. But also, we have other resources, and also online, there's plenty of these questions. If you just look up the, I guess, grammar section of the SAT, you'll get a lot of questions.
All right.
Okay, cool. All right, so the answer is D. A is, yeah, there's also a study guide, and we'll send out that study guide. So A is not true because verifying, it's similar to ensuring, but it's also usually that's when you're fact checking something and you're showing that something is true. So verifying the plant survival, that doesn't really make much sense in the context. So because we're trying to show that this the the indigenous people in North America raising the crops, like, not necessarily verified, didn't like show that it's true, right? But they, I guess, made it proliferate. So that would be ensuring. Multiplying also doesn't really fit. Multiplying the plant's survival, you can't really multiply survival of something. So just grammatically, that doesn't really make sense. And then comforting, also just not really the right word. Doesn't really fit in that sentence. If it doesn't sound right, like thus comforting the plant's survival, that doesn't really sound right. At least to me in my head, that just doesn't feel right. Then it's probably not right. But ensuring the plant's survival, that's going to be right. And yes, this was a level 1 difficulty. So are there any questions about that? Also, for these are some of the questions that you're going to want to study, like the meaning of words for. Like these words weren't really that bad, but in some of them you'll see words that you have never heard of before. So I'd recommend really studying the words. Any questions? Okay, moving on. Diego Velázquez was the leading artist. Oh, someone did ask a question. Will there be figurative language on the SAT and PSAT? Not directly. Sometimes it'll ask what like the purpose of a certain sentence is for, but it won't like ask you what figurative language you're using or anything like that. Okay, so there's a lot of different answers I'm getting for this one. So a couple people actually asked, what does repressed mean? That's kind of what I mean when I say like you have to study the SAT words, because you're not gonna have a dictionary and you just have to know what that means. And this repressed kind of means I guess in this context it would mean like you're not letting it escape, I guess. So like if you're repressing your emotions, you're not letting your emotions show, you know? So the correct answer is C. Really in this type of questions, I would recommend only really reading the sentence that the blank is in. In this exact question, it's the whole sentence. Like this is just one sentence. But in the other one we did before, there was a couple other sentences before that you didn't really need for context. But his influence was hardly derived from Spain. That would make sense in a different context. In this case, though, the follow-up is that people around the world did this or used I guess the ideas from his art. So derived from would mean in this case that his influence comes from Spain, because that's what derived from means, right? So that doesn't really make sense with the context. But his influence was hardly recognized in Spain. Again, that defeats the purpose of the text, right? He was the leading artist in the court of King Philip of Spain. So, of course, they were recognized, right? Because art was super popular. Like, everyone knew the latest artist. So, that doesn't make sense because that would imply that nobody knew who he was and he wasn't influential. But we know that he was. And then repressed by, his influence was hardly repressed by Spain. Repressed isn't really a word that makes sense in the context of this sentence. Just grammatically and in terms of syntax, that just doesn't really go in the sentence. And then confined to, in this case, that's going to mean his influence didn't only extend to Spain, it also extended to everywhere else in the world. Does that make sense? Are there any questions? Oh, and this was a level 2 difficulty. I'm assuming that the reason for it being a level 2 was because a lot of people didn't know what repressed or like confined or maybe even derived meant. So that's just another case of you got to know the SAT words, right? All right, cool. Okay. Oh, didn't it say that he was the leading artist and it said so? I thought that his art wasn't really recognized. What do you mean? Can you clarify? I mean, it says that he was the leading artist, and that kind of implies like you have to infer that his art was recognized just because he was like famous and stuff. And you also have to use, I guess, context clues and just remember that in that time, the person that painted the king and queen, everyone knew who he was and everyone recognized his paintings of the king and the queen? Okay, perfect. Awesome. All right, moving on. Some more of these, I guess, words questions. It is by no means blank to recognize the influence of Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch on Ali Benesadr's paintings. Indeed, I'm not even going to say that. Himself cites Bosch as an inspiration. However, some scholars have suggested that the ancient Mesopotamian poem Epic of Gilgamesh may have had a far greater impact on that guy's work. Which choice completes the text with the most logical or precise word or phrase? All right. Seems like most people have put their answers. So the correct answer, I actually don't know which answer got the most replies this time. It was just so mixed. The correct answer is C. So I guess let's go through each answer. So the first answer is substantial. Oh, also, this was a level 3 question, just because I think some people don't know what some of the words mean. In this case, substantial is probably the one that the most people didn't know what it means. Substantial means important, or just like sufficient, like non-trivial, I guess. So by that, we can tell that substantial and unimportant are going to be opposites. So if substantial is correct, then it's not going to be C. And if substantial is not correct, then it's going to be C. Does that make sense? So it is by no means substantial to recognize the influence of Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch. So that would mean it is by no means important to recognize the influence of him. And that just contradicts everything that the text says, because then we talk about like we're talking about how it was seen to have influenced that other guy's paintings. So that wouldn't really work. And then satisfying. It is by no means satisfying to recognize the influence. That doesn't really. Oh, someone said it isn't important to know that painter. I'd say like in this case it is. You don't like need to know the painter by name, obviously, but it's talking about in this first sentence. It's saying that yeah, this guy did have an influence, but some scholars have suggested yada yada yada, right? So we're saying that while it's not unimportant, this could also be what it is. Does that make sense? No, actually, in this case, the last sentence was not completely irrelevant. Well, I mean, you could exclude it. Actually, I changed my mind. It kind of makes it more confusing. Someone said, I don't understand why it's unimportant. Like why the answer is unimportant or why the answer is unimportant. We'll get to that. So we said it can't be satisfying, and then putting appropriate. It is by no means appropriate to recognize the influence of Dutch painter, that guy. That doesn't make sense. Just because it is by no means appropriate, like to recognize the influence, that means essentially that would mean why are we doing this? Why are we recognizing the importance? And that's just not really the overall tone of the passage. They're not like hating on that Dutch painter or anything. They're kind of acknowledging the importance, which is why going back, it is the answer would be unimportant, because essentially if we put unimportant into that first sentence, it would be it is not unimportant, or in other words, it is important to recognize the influence. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yep, someone said it's a double negative. Yeah. Are there any questions about that? It's kind of confusing because they put that double negative in there and then kind of it seems like they contradicted the first sentence by adding the second sentence, and it's just kind of jumbled. Yeah, so it's saying that it is important. Okay. All right, if there's no more questions, we'll move on to the next one. Okay. Okay, here's another one where it actually gives us like a passage from a novel. Okay. The following text is from Holly Goldberg Sloan's 2017 novel Short. More than 2 years ago, my parents brought a piano from some people who were moving to Utah. Mom and dad gave it to my brothers and me for Christmas. I had to act really happy because it was such a big present, but I pretty much hated the thing from the second it was carried into the hallway upstairs, which is right next to my bedroom. The piano glared at me. It was like a songbird in a cage. It wanted to be set free. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? Yeah, someone asked if this is what a figurative language question would look like. Yeah. It's not going to ask exactly what like a certain simile means, but it has a simile in it and it has other figurative language, and then it's just going to ask what the overall, what is the text trying to get at? Okay. So I'm seeing most people are saying B, and that's correct. So why is it B? Okay, so this is just super general. This whole thing is just explaining how the narrator is like, I guess just the feelings toward the piano, right? I had to act really happy because it was a big present, but I pretty much hated the thing. The piano glared at me. That implies that they didn't like it, right? It was like a songbird in a cage. It wanted to be set free. All those that figurative language is just showing like the narrator doesn't really like the piano. And so the whole point of this little passage is to describe how the narrator feels. Does that make sense? And then A, it explains why the narrator always wanted a piano close to her bedroom. No, it explains exactly, or it doesn't explain exactly why not, but it says that that's not true. The the narrator hated the thing from the second it was carried into her bedroom. So she did not like it. She did not want it there. And then C, it suggests that the narrator's brothers are talented piano players. I didn't see any C's, but just in case there were any, um, it doesn't say that anywhere. Um, yeah, okay, the mom and dad gave it to the brothers for Christmas and the narrator. However, it doesn't really say anything about why would that be the assumption? Why would it show that the brothers are talented piano players, right? So again, there's nowhere that you can pinpoint exact evidence for that. And then D, it describes the event that led the narrator's parents to buy a piano. It does not. It does not do that. That would be before the start of this passage, but they don't include anything before the start of this passage. There's nowhere in the text that it says why they got a piano. Does that make sense? And this was a level 1 question. Are there any questions about this? Okay. All right, moving on. Okay. Here's another one with a passage. The following text is adapted from Paul Laurence Dunbar's 1902 novel, The Sport of the Gods. Joe and some of his family members have recently moved to New York City. Joe was wild with enthusiasm and with a desire to be part of all that the metropolis meant. In the evening, he saw the young fellows pass by dressed in their spruce clothes, and he wondered with a sort of envy where they could be going. Back home, there had been no place much worth going to except church and 1 or 2 people's houses. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? Okay. I think most people have put their answers. I'm seeing a lot of A's, and that's correct. Okay. So, I guess let's go through why the other ones are incorrect first. So it explains why a character has traveled to the city. I did see some B's, and I can kind of see how you would deduce this, but don't think about it too hard, honestly. Because it nowhere in the text does it say directly why he wanted to move to a new city. I mean, you can kind of imply that maybe his old city wasn't too great and that's why they left, but it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that anywhere. So you can't assume that. Um, and in this type of questions, they're not trying to trick you. They're asking for the most straightforward answer. C, it compares a character's thoughts about an event at two different times of day. No. No, there's not really anywhere that says that. It says in the evening here, yeah, but nowhere else. It doesn't really say anything about any other times, and that's again not really like the point of the passage. And then D D says it presents a character feeling regret over leaving home. I'd I'd say it says the opposite. Um, because they're talking about how the new city is like it's different and seems like the narrator likes it better. So it doesn't really give regret, right? And then A, it illustrates a character's reaction to a new environment. This answer doesn't really give any specifics, but it's correct because that's all the passage is talking about. Um, I guess just the character's inner thoughts about the new environment and some details about what's causing him to think those things, right? So that's going to be the right answer. And I think this one was a level 2 for any of you that are wondering. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Seems like there's not. Wow, I really messed up the formatting of this. Okay, anyway. Oh my goodness, Jane Eyre. The following text is from Charlotte Bronte's 1847 novel Jane Eyre. Jane, the narrator, works as a governess at Thornfield Hall. I went on with my day's business tranquilly, but ever and vague suggestions kept wandering across my brain of reasons why I should quit Thornfield, and I kept involuntarily framing advertisements and pondering conjectures about new situations. These thoughts I did not think to check. They might germinate and bear fruit if they could. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? Okay, seems like most people have answered. So this one was a level 3, and a lot of people said in their message that this one was kind of hard. Yeah, yeah. You kind of have to translate this in your head to normal English because remember this was written in 1847, so it doesn't really make that much sense. Like, what does vague mean? What does pondering conjectures? Like, these aren't words that we really use that much nowadays. So you kind of have to translate it into now into regular human. So the answer is A. I did see a lot of A's, so good job, guys. So essentially, what this passage is trying to get at is that Jane is, I guess, having a hard time figuring out what she's gonna do. Like she's in a rough situation, right? So B says that the main purpose of the text was to emphasize Jane's loyalty to the people she works for at Thornfield Hall. This, honestly, you could say the opposite, maybe, that she's thinking about leaving Thornfield. So maybe that means her employers aren't the best, maybe she's not loyal to them. So that's not going to be true because again, there's nowhere in the text that you can pinpoint that to, and you can even maybe pinpoint the opposite. C, to demonstrate that Jane feels finds her situation both challenging and deeply fulfilling. Challenging, yes. Yes, you can see that she finds it challenging. But where does it, you can't really find a place where it says that it's deeply fulfilling, right? She's only in this case talking about the challenging part of it. And then D, to describe Jane's determination to secure employment outside of Thornfield Hall. That's also going to be incorrect just because she's having a hard time figuring out if she should leave Thornfield, right? So she's not necessarily determined to find other employment. That's not really what the passage is getting at. It's getting at her outward calmness and internal restlessness. So the outward calmness, you see that here. My day's business tranquilly. My day's business tranquilly. Tranquil means calm. Again, SAT word. And then the internal restlessness is kind of supported with the whole rest of the text. So ever and anon vague suggestions kept wandering across my brain of reasons why. I kept involuntarily framing asthma retirements. They might germinate and bear fruit. Like those are all kind of suggesting her unease or anxiety toward the situation. So that's why A is going to be right. And I did see a lot of C's. I can see how that could, how you could kind of construe that as true. However, she only talks about the challenging part of it and doesn't really indicate that it's fulfilling because you don't know any background in this case. Are there any more questions? And then after this, we'll do one more problem, and then I'll answer some general questions about the PSAT and like the SAT and stuff. All right. Okay, let's move on, do one more. Oh, this is one of the text 1, text 2 ones. Okay. Okay, so these ones take a little bit longer. Text 1. Most scientists agree that the moon was likely formed after a collision between Earth and a larger planet named Theia. This collision likely created a huge debris field made up of material from both Earth and Theia. Based on models of this event, scientists believe that the moon was formed from this debris over the course of thousands of years. Text 2. Researchers from NASA's Ames Research Center used a computer to model how the moon could have formed. Although simulations of the moon's formation have been done in the past, the team from NASA ran simulations that were much more detailed. They found that the formation of the moon was likely not a slow process that took many years. Instead, it's probable that the moon's formation happened immediately after the impact, taking just a few hours. Which choice best describes a difference in how the author of text 1 and the author of text 2 view the evidence for the formation of the moon? Okay. Seems like the responses are slowing down now. So I'm seeing a lot of D's, and yeah, that's the right answer. So I'm also seeing B's though, and someone asked what's the difference between A and D, so I'll address that first. A says that the author of text 1 argues that the formation of the moon occurred earlier than the author of text 2. In either text, there's not really any. Oh, this is a level 1, by the way. Some people are asking that. It's a really bad one, whatever. So in text 1, it doesn't say when it happened. It says that, yeah, I mean, it took thousands of years in text 1, but it doesn't say like when. Same as text 2, it doesn't say when. It kind of shows the duration rather than the exact time at which it happened. And then B. Okay, I can see how B could be another answer that might seem true, but you have to remember that it's talking about the formation of the moon. It's not talking about Theia. Text 1 does talk about Theia, and then text 2 doesn't, but that's not the point. The point is kind of there are different perspectives on it, because you never know. The text 2 author may also think that that collision happened, but they just don't say it. What they're focused on is how long it took. There's three levels in total. So 1 out of 3 is the level of this one for whoever asked. And then C just I don't think I saw any C's in there, but C doesn't really make any sense because neither text says anything about, I guess, the surface of the moon or the surface of the earth, really. And then D is correct just because text 1 says that it formed over the course of thousands of years, and then text 2 says it took just a few hours. Someone said text 2 implies that they think that collision happened with after impact. What do you mean? So text 2 doesn't really say anything about the, yeah. Yeah. Is that a dog? Okay, anyway. Text 2 does says that it happened immediately after impact. So between, yeah. So yeah, it doesn't directly say that it's talking about Thea, I guess, but text 2 does imply that it was Thea because it says after the impact. So yeah, I guess I just skipped over that. But yeah, so both imply the existence of Thea, so that's another reason why B would be wrong. So then we're kind of left with choice D, which encompasses the main point of both passages.